Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Chestnut Checkers. I am Keith Riddle here, as always, with my co-host Jordan Tampien. And today we have a really special guest, Alan Nolan. Thanks for joining us, Alan.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and we got hooked up from a mutual friend. Carrie reached out to me, and I won't say her whole name. I don't know if she wants me to, but Carrie is one of those friends of mine that anytime she texts or emails me, I kind of pay attention.
Yeah.
She just, I don't like.
That's a high bar.
We
That's
share. Yeah, right.
Unlike a Jordan text or phone call. We got 48-hour rule on my stuff.
She's in the circle of trust.
Yeah, but you text me or too much.
True, yeah. That's funny.
She doesn't text me that often.
Yeah.
It's like once a month or something.
Know.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But anyways, I respect her and kind of her viewpoints or opinions on things, but also just, when she gives me a heads up. And so she said, hey, there's a guy I think that you guys should chat with. And Alan's name came up, and we had a very brief conversation within like 5 minutes. I was like, yeah, we need to have this guy on the podcast.
That's cool.
So,
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So Alan, Spokane native?
No, I moved here in 2015. So I grew up in Michigan, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And born in South Dakota, family moved to Michigan. And so that's where I grew up. And then after I left the high school, I went out to Colorado Springs. It was at the Air Force Academy. Yeah. And then I moved here in 2015 after I got out of the Air Force. So, and that was all because of my wife. I actually do have a sister here as well. I'll only use her first name. We'll keep it on first name base. And that was really coincidental. My wife, she's a Northwest girl, considers herself from Montana, but she'd also gone to the Falls for the interior design program. So wanted to be closer to home. She used to make sabbaticals up here to get away from the Texas heat during the summers anyway. So I'd kind of gotten to know it. And really, there's a lot here that's similar to what I grew up with in Michigan, other than there's more geography. Yeah. So it was very comfortable for me. And plus, moving around in the Air Force, I felt at home wherever I was. So it didn't bother me. And I drug her around to some of the hot spots.
Were you ever stationed here when you were in the Air Force?
No.
Okay. I feel like Spokane gets a lot of Air Force transplants from Fairchild.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks. I mean, because it is a great place to live. Yeah. So there are a lot of folks who come and they stick and they stay. But for me, there wasn't anything that would have brought me here. I mean, even they've got the survival school. And so that brings a lot, because I was a flyer. So that brings a lot of folks through. But they run that at the academy. So I wasn't even here for that. It was just occasional visits. And I flew helicopters, I flew fighters, even flying a trainer aircraft down in Texas. And so none of that would have brought me up here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So 2015.
Yep. 2015 moved here. And I initially was flying for a little bit. My wife helped her set up a business so she's an interior designer. And she would try and set up businesses when we were deployed at various places, but it's kind of tough because they recognize, hey, you're a military wife, you're going to be gone in a couple of years. And so there really wasn't the interest. And so I supported her on that. We'd always renovated our homes. And so I ended up doing a lot of that work, DIY type stuff, but we're like, well, all right, I'm going to manage the projects for you. Yeah. The last house that we had in Tucson, we gutted that thing, and it was a little ridiculous because we moved in when we had one sink and one toilet, just enough to get our certificate of occupancy. And then when we left at the end, we did our last project. The kids and all of us, we jumped in the pool. I'm like, okay, we're all done. Let's go. So we jumped in the truck. And moved
I've done that too many times.
Yeah. But that experience, so at least I was familiar with how to manage a project, especially on the residential side. So I jumped into that, joined the Spokane Home Builders. And so
you can feel our pain on the real estate construction side, development side of things.
Oh yeah. I at least understand that. Now I got a couple of guys who thankfully do a lot of the hands-on stuff, but I still do get on the job from time to time.
So, and I'm sorry I interrupted you there, but you were the head of the Spokane Builders Association?
No. I worked through, we joined them because I'm not a native. And we were talking before about how Spokane, it's not 6 degrees of separation, it's maybe 2. Right. So I didn't know anybody. And we thought, hey, this would be a good way to get more connected with the building industry here and get to know some people. And I served as their government affairs guy for a couple of years, and that helped me make some introductions and learn about what was going on here. But really, we've been focused on our business and growing that for the last decade.
And what's that business?
So 509 Design.
Okay.
Primarily, we do residential remodeling. It's really all built around my wife and her design work. And then actually about 2 years ago, because she'd had a connection, her first job coming out of Spokane Falls design program, was with the wife of an architect here, Sam Rodell. And Sam, his wife said, hey, listen, Wendy's back in town. You need to hire her. And so Sam called up Wendy and Wendy said, listen, I want to run my own business, but I'm happy to come and work with you on your projects. So she was working out of the steam plant for a while. But downtown, not a great place. And so we've been working to find places to be. And we purchased one property up near Francis and Division that we'd meant to renovate. City made it difficult. Ultimately ended up renting a place in the Garland about 2 years ago and really loved that. In fact, had the opportunity just about a year ago to go in and double our size because we were actually starting to already get cramped. So really happy with the Garland, but we've got a place there where it's got the furnishings that she represents and accessories and a lot of other fun stuff. It's she and one of our other employees, Kirsten, have just done a fantastic job at that.
Nice.
We're out in the Garland.
So everybody knows the milk bottle. Everybody knows the theater. It's the opposite side, just about dead center of it. There's that
like
street
by Garland Brew Works, like that side of it.
Garland
the east side
Brew Works
of
is further to the east. So between the milk bottle and the theater.
Yeah.
So,
that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So left.
Over by the Rocket there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
In fact, we're like 2 doors down from the Rocket. Our sign, because we just moved over, it was kind of it's a rush getting us into the building. We did most of the renovation work ourselves. So I got all the interior
Is
stuff
that one
done.
of Orcut's buildings?
Nope. We used to be in
Say
gyms.
Orcut owns-
Statistically, it was gonna be-
That would have been a high percentage.
It's a very high percentage.
We were renting
Jim,
from Jim for a while,
Nice.
but got a chance to the Garland printing shop. He was closing down. He sold that. The guy who bought it was willing to let us go in, and so we're co-owners and have additional space or getting to stay in the area. And we, like I said, we really like the district.
Cool. I love that district.
Yeah, we still got to work on the exterior. That's hopefully next week's project where we get that up and get our signs back up.
Awesome.
That's really cool.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted you to come on the show, and I'm sure we're going to dive into all sorts of topics, but you're currently running for State Rep District 6.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
So tell me about the different districts and what that means, because I'm always...
So it's divided up throughout the state, obviously, in these districts. And Spokane has got, I want to say 4, Spokane County, that is. Yeah. So there's the 9th, which is kind of mostly to the south. There's the 3rd, which encompasses a lot of the South Hill, the north side of the river. There's the 4th, which is kind of the northeast side of Spokane County, Spokane Valley, a lot of Liberty Lake. The 6th legislative district encompasses Hilliard, runs on up kind of along Highway 2 and basically the left side. So west of Highway 2, almost up to the Stevens County border, not quite.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It dives back down, does not include Deer Park because that's 7th legislative district. And then it basically continues west from that and goes out Mead, Colbert, a lot of the 5 Mile Prairie, a lot of Indian Trail, 9 Mile Falls, a lot of the West Plains. It doesn't include Cheney because that's 9th further down south, but it does have Medical Lake and most of Airway Heights in the base out to the county line.
Got it. So, and obviously you live in the district.
I do, yeah.
Which I believe is a requirement.
Absolutely. You gotta be a
gotta
resident.
live there to run there. That's right. But what spurred that? Like where did that come from?
That's what I'm always curious of.
Well, yeah, when people get into politics,
voluntarily choose to do it.
Well, I'm sure people have asked you, Jordan, are you going to get in politics or why are you not involved in politics? People have asked me, and it's because once you know a little bit of it.
We got to recruit you.
Oh, that's a solid one. And I can say this because I tell my wife all the time. I said, my wife is the best person ever, but our politics are different. So I said, man, just because of you, I don't think I can ever run for office. I said, because I want you to be able to go speak your mind no matter whenever you're out there. But I was asked like twice and I'm like, I just don't, I got behind the curtains once or twice. And I'm like, I don't know who the people that do it are good at it. It's fun to watch, but it's just not my.
Well, you never know. Don't never say never. You're very young, Jordan. You're very young.
I wanted to say it out loud on here so that way when somebody does say that, I'm like, I'm not doing it. But
yeah, so you're on the record. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm neutral. Like that's probably the worst thing to ever say. But I feel
like you'd be pretty good.
I'm like, yeah, I would probably do it in the right scenario situation, but it just hasn't come along. And also, I'm like, I'm not seeking that, right? Like I don't have any sort of like political, I think, like aspirations, but I also like am passionate about like community and things that are happening where I'm like, I'm like definitely kind of like, yeah, I could see it happening.
And to that point, we've had 5 now politicians or people running for political office like Luke Jasmine was on here, and he's run for the 4th, I believe.
Yep.
And then
third.
Third. Yep. And then Jonathan Bingle. And
all
then,
right.
Yeah. And so it's been funny, but they've all had kind of a different reason of why they did. And some were spurred into action because of what they didn't see happening. Some just loved it. Like Jonathan just loved it. But yeah, anyways.
Maybe this is actually the thing that's going to get you into, because for me, the only reason I'm running is because about 3 years ago now, 2023. So we're in the Mead School District, and my wife, in fact, when we came from Texas, or actually came from Tucson, I sent her up there with my 1-year-old and said, all right, we got to go find us a house, because she knew the area, and she found us. It was like the last of the big 2008 crash houses that was left over. And so we bought that, and she bought it because she's like, okay, we're either going to be in the Mead School District or Cheney, and Mead was really where we wanted to be. And this is the only one that we could find that it was really within our budget and got us into the Mead School District. So it's actually kind of funny, because this house had sat vacant for like 7 years. And for the first about 18 months, people would stop as they were driving past and say, we're so glad somebody finally moved into this house. But yeah, because it apparently had been, the yard was a disaster. Neither here nor there. So I saw the Mead School District is good, but I saw things that concern me, just like you see across the country. And so I had voted for Michael Cannon to bring some fresh blood in on the school board. I had gone out and then supported Breanne Gray, was really glad to see her get elected. And then there was another lady who I was expecting I was going to be supporting her in 2023 for the seat where I live in. And at the last minute, apparently she'd backed out. And the only reason I knew it is Breanne called me up and said, all right, the person who we thought was going to run has backed out. We don't have anybody else. The guy who ran against hadn't been opposed for 25 years and was going to be unopposed again. Would you consider running? And so I talked to my family.
25 years on the school board?
Exactly. And that was one of the things I have. It's not supposed to be a career.
No, I wouldn't think so. But
I kind of think for the most part, you probably ought to have kids in the district so you got a little bit of skin in the game, or at least kids that are school age. I understand, hey, maybe some folks they're retired and they're still interested in that sort of stuff. That's great. But ultimately, so nobody was going to run. I had some exposure to politics based on what I was doing with the Spokane Home Builders. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And so a lot of it just kind of really fell into place. I mean, I already knew the things I wanted to have happen in the district. I kind of had a feel for how you go out and do campaigning based on trying to support others. And luckily I had Michael Cannon and then Jennifer Kilman, who also ran with me at the same time. So we had a team together, which helped make it a lot easier. And so that was the reason why I ran in that. If I hadn't had that call, honestly, I like you, maybe I'd do politics, but it's one of those things like, how do I really do it? It's kind of big and scary. Sure. And I don't think I would have stepped off that cliff if somebody hadn't kind of given me that little nudge. And so maybe that's what it would take for you someday, or, maybe that's what it is. It's that little trigger. And honestly, the fact that you aren't looking to do it is probably a good reason.
That's why you will do it. I'm proactively looking not to do it. So.
I think it's well down the road, but who knows?
But ultimately, the things we've been able to do on the school board is the reason why I'm running now, is because there have been problems, but I think we've been really successful. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do on the Mead School Board. I think we've done a great job of pulling ideology out of the classroom. I think we've done a good job of refocusing on education. And this isn't to say that our teachers weren't looking to do that, but here's a good example. Based on fiscal issues, we hadn't purchased new curriculum in a lot of areas in over a decade, some of it even longer. And just about a month, I think it was about 6 weeks ago now, was the first time that we actually went out and got new curriculum. And we also made sure that we had brought parents in along with staff. So we knew we had curriculum that is going to be challenging and is also as unbiased as anything can be. I mean, there's a little bit of bias in everything, but we had parent involvement.
Sure.
The board looked at it closely, and we had, the teachers there.
You're educating me right now, because I didn't even realize this, but so school districts buy their curriculum.
Oh yeah.
So there's people who creates the curriculum.
There are companies out there that do that just like anything else.
And is some of it like tried and true or proven? They're like, oh, this school is also running it, or this school has run it, or is this like brand new out of the box, or is it just?
Well, it could be all of the above.
Okay.
And this is a little bit interesting too. So we did a couple of test classes. One of the first one, and this was a little bit contentious because it's social studies. So that is one of the areas where there's a lot of people like, hey, how are you viewing history and things like that? And so that was one of the first ones that we reviewed and vetted. And my daughter ended up she's in middle school and ended up being in one of those classes. So when I'm looking at the class or the textbooks, bringing them home, she actually saw them and go, "Oh, great!" And I thought it was kind of funny that my daughter was excited about that. That was that I brought textbooks home and we were getting new textbooks. So.
Another odd question: how do they differentiate social studies from history? Is it the same thing?
It's kind of all the same. I mean, there's a lot of history. Yeah,
it's the same.
Right?
Yeah, usually you have different things maybe pop up in social studies from like a trending perspective versus all history.
Right. I feel like history maybe is just like the very nuts and bolts, like this war started on this date, it ended on this date, this is the day that this state was founded. I think social studies is more like the study of what was going on culturally and socially during those things, right? Like, I don't know. I'm making this up, by the way. I'm saying, like, in my mind, social studies is a different type of study, but I guess that's when I think back of taking like history classes. That's what I think of as social studies. I just haven't heard anybody call that in a long time.
Yeah. Well, no, I'll tell you what, I think the reason probably for it is kind of the concept of we're not just looking to teach facts and figures. Right. What we want is critical thinking skills and understanding what's going on. And again, I'm making it up as I'm going right now too, because I would say probably the fact that the educational community is calling it social studies, just that recognition that it's more than just memorizing the War of 1812 started on, who's buried in Grant's tomb, things like that.
So, right.
Well, and you forget those board positions make a lot of that stuff, right? Because you get a choice of curriculums. It's not like one history book.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're picking and choosing how that education goes. I think it's why I've always appreciated the Mead School District. I think sometimes they run into, I've went to Whitworth, so a lot of my friends are teachers, actually, a lot of them in the Mead School District. And so you get that feedback, but I would argue it's one of the better run.
So not to get stuck here, but I'm just curious, give me the dynamic of the district and the board. Like, what does that look like?
So now we've actually got pretty much everyone on there is somebody who considers himself a conservative and is not from the educational institution, which is really kind of a big switch. Traditionally, communities, we've been kind of asleep at the wheel with school districts. You're like, okay, yeah, there's a school board. Honestly, I hadn't really even thought about the fact there was a school board until my kids were in there and really even well into school that I even thought about what a school board does. And most of the time it was folks who had been, a lot of time they were educators themselves or maybe administrators. And we just didn't really think about it a whole bunch. Almost everyone actually on our board now is from somewhere else. And I think that that's really a good thing where
geographically or industry, or is it
industry kind of specialty, their experience, their kind of worldview. And I think that that's important because there is very much an educational institution and educational mindset. And I talk with my superintendent about this a lot, and sometimes he doesn't always appreciate it, but I tell him, I think it's good that none of us are from the educational world, because especially as long as we're willing to listen and hear what they've got to say, but we're bringing different perspectives. And so there are things that they aren't thinking about. Here's a good example. And, there was some collective bargaining that was going on with one of the unions, and it was a bit contentious. And one of the things I brought forward, like, okay, in the military, what we do is contingency planning, and a strike is a contingency planning. And that was, it wasn't, I didn't think it was likely, but it was a possibility. And
that union went on strike and you guys were left dealing with
exactly. Yeah. Because honestly, our job is to take care of parents and kids. And it's tough to do that. Think it's very difficult, especially for young kids. You're counting on that, especially if you're a family that's got two jobs or a single family, single parent family, and they're working. So the fact that you've all of a sudden now got to take care of childcare is a big deal. And I brought that up, and that it just was like it was a concept that it didn't make, it wasn't something they even considered, because that's not the educational world of doing that contingency type planning. That was my bread and butter when I was in the military.
Right. So you basically just brought up the idea of like, hey, if we can't come to an agreement here, or a strike occurs, we have to have a backup plan. And and they were just basically had not thought of a backup plan. They're like, oh, we'll figure it out, or they kind of just banked on we being able to negotiate it.
Yeah. And it was really coming down to, and what my goal would be is like, okay, we got to help as many of the parents as we can. We're not going to be able to continue on with classes. That's understood, but we still need kids to have a safe place to land. And we should help out the parents that we can.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if you could snap your finger, the last school question, because very rarely do we get somebody in that makes these decisions. But like, I assume you're talking budget a lot, the constraints of a budget. But let's say for one moment you didn't have one. What are things you would do in the school district different now if you weren't so constrained by keeping the ACs working?
And the curriculum still remains a pretty big deal where, again, the district has not spent money on that in a really long time. And honestly, too, there's probably maybe a little bit of a shift in terms of how we spend some of our support resources. And we're talking about, our focus is on educational outcomes and trying to figure out where do we get the most bang for the buck. And a lot of that is really helping the kids at the earlier years to develop those core skills so that on down the line, they continue to excel and do a better job in their classroom as opposed to trying to catch somebody up later on. And one of the goals I've talked to my superintendent about, and I'm not sure they're necessarily on board with it because it does require additional resources. Around second grade, you make a transition from teaching a kid how to read to where they're learning through reading. So that's a really fairly critical stage where if you can have a kid who is reading at grade level, and that's one of those statistics that we talk about a lot, how are we doing relative to that? But if we can get them at that point, then that helps them to continue on and stay with their peers and get the most out of the academic instruction that their teachers doing. So I've talked about that I would love to see us be able to take on a goal of we get 100% of our kids entering third grade who are reading at grade level. And that would be for the general education population. For some schools, that's really easy to do where they're already pretty much achieving that. For some, where it's more of a transient, people are renting, they may not be there for a super long time. There's a big correlation between income levels and educational outcomes. It's true across the country. And that's one of the things we look to try and eliminate, where no matter where you come from, we're giving that kid the tools that they need to achieve whatever their potential is. But in some of those lower income areas, it's a much heavier lift. And so those teachers are I don't want to give somebody a goal where they go, there is no way I can do this, because that's disheartening. Yeah. So it's coming up with a plan where they buy in on the goal and they understand, and we're helping them with the resources where it's needed so that it's an achievable goal. And that's one of the things I try and do. And again, that's coming from outside the educational community. I just bring a different perspective, and I think that's important. And that's one of the things I think is really good about having a publicly elected school board.
Yeah. Mead's a big district. Not to just get stuck on Mead. There's a lot of big districts in Spokane, not just Mead, but it's a big district. And so, some of those kids are showing up. They can show up in second grade, from
absolutely.
somewhere else, right? And it's like, now you've got 9 months or whatever to try to teach somebody to read, and without having the ability to have nurtured them up to second grade, right? But I think that's a really interesting thing to think about that you just stated. Like at that transitional period, you're not self-learning, but you're learning through your ability to read, right? So if up until second grade, you're trying to teach them to read, but third grade or whatever on, a big chunk of their ability to learn anything is going to be in the classroom and out of classroom. And if you can't, if you're not up to reading stuff out of classroom, your ability to,
those core skills.
Those are the things that you don't think about, at least I don't, until you do. And then you think about like how hard it would be to learn anything if you couldn't read, or your reading was minimal, right? Yeah. Just because it's like, well, you have ChatGPT or the internet or books or whatever. It's like, well, if you can't read, you're relying on either, I don't know, somebody else to orate for you, or that would be extremely difficult.
Yeah, just the learning, probably the mental, all the things behind that of learning to read, right? Triggering your brain, teaching your brain, all those different parts.
Yep.
Yeah. Because AI will be an interesting one, because it introduces where knowledge will become equal. Right. So you'll be able to have that information, voice.
Yeah, but we've talked some about this, as I don't think your retention is near.
That's the issue, right? Like if you're not learning.
If you were to read me an instruction manual as opposed to give me an instruction manual, it's going to be really hard for me to like put something together or figure something out if you're just reading me the manual, right? Like,
and that's where those cognitive skills of reading, right? Like just that, being able to process that information to know what to do with it will become an interesting one. And where school becomes more important, I think. So this thought of like, hey, now all of a sudden I can type in, when was the War of 1812? Like, why do I need to learn that? And the whole point isn't what date was the War of 1812. It's how do you process where the War of 1812 sat in proximity here. And so you come this almost, I'm thinking the word's slipping, but it's almost that next level learning where that basic level is going to be there and readily accessible. But it's how do you learn to process all that information?
Well, I think we spent a ton of time talking on this podcast too about trying to disseminate information from, fact, from fiction, and all, one of the big problems that a lot of people are facing now is there's so much information out there and misinformation and we're just kind of taking the information for granted. What you're talking about is going back a step of like, these people are having a hard time accessing or reading the information. Yeah. So it's like a two-stepper, but that's really interesting to think about. I think that's
think of how much wider the gap gets then.
Oh, right.
So then you're having income to obviously inequalities, but think about educational inequalities, location, geographical, all those become wider canyons between them. And it's really tough to bridge if you never go upstream enough to get it. So
one of the individuals who's a big supporter of kind of the Mead School District, and I'm not going to mention him by name because he prefers not to be named, but he talks about having employees and he goes, I used to want to get more of the vocational type of skills, but really, can they just have them show up and they know how to read and they know basic math? And it's those core skills. And he recognizes that it doesn't really matter what they're looking to do. Yeah, he'd love to have them well-trained for his specific industry, but there are so many other needs out there. And you never really know, like I was talking with your producer, Other Brennan, and how his job and how 7 years ago being a podcast producer, that probably wasn't really even a thing. Mm-hmm. And you want people to have those skills that are adaptable as opposed to just fixed.
Yeah. And Brennan can read too. Yeah. We
think he can.
So well done. We're pretty sure Brennan can read.
Certain.
We can test him right here.
Well, Alan, so transition us from the school district, right? Yep. That's a little bit about how you got involved in politics.
Yeah.
But one of the things that connected us and that we talked about is your state representative race that's currently happening. Talk to us about that. Like, so again, how'd you get into that? And then what are some of the things that you're passionate about in that direction?
Right. So again, the things that we were able to do on the school board and the types of problems that I saw on it, it's kind of a microcosm. And the fact that we've been able to make progress, get to a balanced budget after having been in a financial emergency, I think that gave me hope that we can go and maybe we can address some things, even though assuming that I get elected, I'm likely to be in a big minority. Yeah. But I think the types of skills that I bring from my military, my business background, and now educational experience, these are issues that we're working with across the state. And when I was running, people accused me and the others who I was running with that we were just going to we were going to politicize the school board. I think the opposite has been true. And I think we can show that, listen, we're looking for achievement. We're looking for results. And I'm willing to work with whomever, even if I don't necessarily agree with them on that. And so I think going to Olympia with having somebody like that mindset is helpful to try and achieve things and at least turn the direction a little bit, move the needle somewhat. And the other thing I think is important, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on talking through my points on the campaign. Yeah, I mean, fiscal responsibility is an issue. We've got issues with accountability in the government as well as in our community. Those are things we need to address because all it's harming opportunity for families and businesses and for our kids to have the type of opportunity that we have. But I think that running here locally is good because we can try and solve local problems. And one of them that has really come to light actually in the last couple of weeks is awareness of the Spokane Transit Authority Prop 1, where they're asking to renew a tax that is helping to fund the busing service. And I'm not opposed to public transit, and that's not really what this proposition is about, this ballot referendum. It's really about good governance. It's about that fiscal responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's about accountability. And I've got concerns, and that end is kind of what drove you and I meeting.
Yeah. And so I will explain this and then you tell me where I'm wrong. But from my understanding was right is like in 2016, which is about 10 years ago, there was a ballot measure that passed where the STA got a collection of taxpayer funds, right? And, that was supposed to end in 2026, right? Yep. It was a 10-year
2028 actually is when it's going to end,
Okay.
But it's supposed to be renewed.
But now they're trying to renew it, right? So here's, like you fact check all this all you want, but I got an email the other day, but I was unaware of this, but this is an email that a gentleman put out that said the reserves that the STA holds since 2026 were at 40.3 million. Today are $274 million in reserves.
Yep.
So the Spokane Transit Authority has $274 million in reserves compared to $40 million in reserves since receiving that tax. Now they would like to say they would like to receive more of it, which I can understand when you're sitting on $230 million in surplus. But a big chunk of that, they're talking about spending on Division Street to put in, well, you can explain this probably better, but a specific bus stations up Division. And there's all sorts of, I guess you'd say, issues with that or potential issues with that, right? Like, we don't even know necessarily if we weighed out all the good and the bad. And my other argument, or the thing this gentleman talks about, is we haven't finished the North-South Freeway yet, right? Which finishing the North-South Freeway in Spokane is going to drastically change traffic patterns and how people travel through Spokane. Because as of right now, Division Street is the North-South corridor that we actually have. So you're making, I guess, decisions to potentially disrupt what's currently happening using a large portion of taxpayer money when we still have unfinished projects that you're utilizing taxpayer money that are going to change those traffic patterns. So that's kind of my take on it. So to me, it was really easy to say like, whoa, or let's pump the brakes here, like look into this. What's your take on it?
Actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to step back a little bit, because there's one of the things I think you got to do is, rather than look at policy first, is get people to agree on what the problem is and maybe what the goal is. And a lot of times when I came out in opposition to this tax renewal, people are like, oh, you're against public transit, and hey, there are these people who really need that. Well, that's not the issue. And also, I'm not saying that we don't have public transit at all. The question is this money necessary? And you mentioned that the additional funds that they received via the 2016 levy, realize that that's actually only a portion of it. STA also gets another 0.6% sales tax, and that's permanent. There's no voting on that. So I don't know what they've got over the last year, but over the next 20-year period where this renewal would be in effect, the 0.2% that we're voting on, that'd give them about an additional $1 billion. The 0.6% that are already guaranteed, that's $3 billion. So there's a pretty significant amount of public funding that's already going to support.
Yeah, and I didn't mention that, but you're absolutely correct. They already received public funding that is not going to be taken away or isn't in jeopardy of being taken away. This is an additional amount.
Yeah, and for people who are concerned, okay, is this going to take away bus transit from somebody who needs that badly? Well, no, because they've actually saved money faster during this last 10 years when this 0.2% has been in effect than what it came in. The sales tax itself brought in about $169 million, and they've added $234 million, like you alluded to. I'll hold off on touching on the North-South, or the division stuff, because that's a whole separate topic. And I think there is some tie-in for the timing on that. But let's get away from the idea that this question is about whether or not we continue Spokane Transit Authority busing. No, it's not. It's whether or not they need this money, and are they really doing a good job with the money that they've got. And there's some serious questions as to whether or not that's true. And one example is that after the tax passed in 2016, they've grown their staff by 56%. Okay. In that same 10-year period, ridership is about flat. Now, I understand things dropped off in COVID, and they have been back up towards that.
Sure.
But when you look at it on a per capita basis, because Spokane's been growing, they're down actually about 19%. And these numbers, almost all these numbers are from the Spokane Business Association. And Gavin Cooley, he's the president of that. And he was the chief financial officer for the city of Spokane for about 17 years. So he is a guy who knows.
He's got a pretty good lock on the numbers.
Yeah, he understands government accounting very well. So we're happy to talk about the numbers, but this isn't something we're pulling out of thin air. Again, I like to try and always have source data. So those are the concerns: is that money really needed in order to even maintain the current level of service? And has STA really done a good job? Because here's the other thing. I understand there's going to be some public funding for public transit, but STA's goal for fare box recovery, the money that they make from collecting fares, is 20%. They don't even get close to that. Per Gavin's calculations, they're a little bit under 9%. And they've instituted some other programs where people think they may actually be closer to about 4 to 6%. Yeah. That's way below passing. Yeah.
And that because it doesn't count the grants from. Yeah, they're at 9% last time we looked.
Yeah. So
and what that means is that their revenue, only 9% comes from people actually riding the bus. 91% of the revenue. Oh, I turned that off. Sorry to fact check my own self when I did that.
No, and so I look at this two ways, and to be fair, right, to play devil's advocate for a minute, what I understand a lot of times is that change is hard, and doing what they're proposing doing to division and making it much more bus friendly and all of the stuff that they want to add and shutting down lanes and this and that. For like immediately, I understand that, you know, it's change and it's going to be different and people are going to resist that to some extent. So then I ask myself the question of like, is there something that we're not seeing here? Or is this like foresight that's going to build into something that might be needed in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Like, will we look back and go, man, I'm sure glad we did that STA thing, you know, 10 years from now, which I think is like the argument that's like the progressive style argument is like, you have to progressively get in front of things before they happen, right? Like you can't have this need for bus transit where people need bus transit and don't have it. And now you're trying to fix a problem. Yeah. So this is kind of, I think a lot of their argument or the common sense is they're like, well, okay, it's not necessary now, but we're going to put this into place. But trust me, you're going to appreciate it in years to come. Yeah. And I think you've seen that pan out in various scenarios where you're like, yeah, that was a great idea. You know, glad someone had the foresight to think that or do that. But I think you've also seen it in a variety of other cases where you're like misappropriation of funds, bunch of money wasted, a bunch of money gone. I think the biggest argument that I put forward with that respect is I do think it's very short-sighted to do this prior to finishing the North-South Freeway. To me is very...
Alex, but they're different funds, right? So
no, different funds, but you're making a decision right, based on transit that's going to drastically change.
Yeah.
That's my argument. Is like, so...
But like STA is not going to fund the North-South Freeway, right? It's a Tiger grant from state.
No. And it doesn't really, it doesn't matter to me if the funds touch. I guess in my mind, logically, I'm like...
But you could do both.
Well, of course, but you could always do both, right?
Yeah, but I was like, I don't think those are mutually exclusive, right? I think they can independently.
No, I'm not saying it's do one or the other. What I'm saying is you're making a decision to do this based on now and based on the traffic patterns now, which are going to change, and you don't know what that looks like. Yeah. And so to me, it's like such a gamble of so much money.
That's true. And so I mentioned kind of trying to identify and agree on the problem. And here's what I think is the problem that we were looking to agree on. Hey, there is a subset of the community where we are a vehicle-driven society. And so you do need transportation in order to get around, whether it's to work, to the grocery store, or something like that. Yeah, I know there are a lot who are pushing for maybe the 15-minute walkable communities. I don't think that that's realistic, not in the near term. So there's a valid need there. But is really the current transit system the answer for that? And I think you guys have you've been running a business, so you got to sell stuff. And here's one of those maxims that I heard somebody quote to me as far as selling something. It's easy to sell something to a person that they don't need, but you can't ever sell them something that they don't want. And I think you got to make the argument like, okay, STA, have you really shown that this is something that the community wants? I understand there's a certain number of people who want it, but all of the empty STA buses that you see around there, some of them are feeding their main lines, and they do have some lines that are profitable. But I think it's hard to make the argument that the model that they're adopting makes sense based on our community. I'm not opposed to the idea that we are finding a way to support public transit for low income, but I don't know that this model, and does it really make sense that we're going to go and dedicate either 1/3 or 1/2 of the lanes on North Division Street to public transit? I don't think that you can make that argument based on what the people are saying, because people are voting with their feet, because most people don't have to pay very much. The maximum fare is $2 on STA, and the cost to ride is over $12.
Well, and I think the other aspect of that too is like, I think you could make the argument very easily that Spokane already has a great transit system like in place as far as like for the needed service, and it's not even being currently utilized, right? To its extent. I think the thing I think about, and we've talked a little bit about this on previous podcasts, but just like the overarching need in today's modern day society for convenience and for, like you said, selling people things that they may or may not need. It's like, I have this kind of concept where it's like, how come every grocery store that you go to, like you could be in Wisconsin or you could be in Michigan or wherever, has like the same aisles, and you have like the seafood aisle and you have this, and I'm like, is it weird that we're serving seafood in Ohio, like on demand? Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm sure it's very convenient. I'm sure the person who lives there likes the fact that they can go to their local grocery store and get fresh shrimp. I'm also thinking, you're wasting a ton of resources making that happen. And there is a ton of waste and byproducts that happens trying to get somebody who doesn't live next to the ocean to be able to go down and get seafood anytime they want it. I understand conceptually it's a great idea. I understand it's very convenient. I also think if you start weighing it out, it's like, it's very unnecessary too. People that live there might not hear me saying, you know, maybe they don't get seafood or something, but it's like, I would think that pragmatically speaking, yes, if you live in Alaska, you would have more plentiful seafood, but you probably might not have, I don't know, lamb or sheep or something in your grocery store. We have kind of built this world based upon convenience and everybody having everything everybody else has. And I look at this problem very similar. I know this might be a weird stretch, but I'm like, I think the bus system is just fine. I think it serves its purpose. I think that people that need it find a way to make it work. I think that it's probably not getting utilized as much as it is. To me, just to go and spend this money, I look at like bringing seafood to someone in the desert. I'm like, we are not San Francisco. We are not Seattle. We don't have 6 million people that live here. You have I don't think people realize how much smaller of a populace we are. As good as Spokane is, it's like 500,000 people, including the entire county, and the bus service doesn't even cover that, you know. Yeah. How big is Seattle?
Yeah.
Seattle's a density question too. That's one of the big
it's
issues.
like,
it's
you're
huge.
talking millions of people versus 250,000.
Well,
people.
and there's restrictions, right? We lived in London. Like, you can't even afford to have a car in London. They tax you to have it downtown, right? We don't have that. So having a car is still super convenient and still relatively affordable. But the reason I was bringing up the funding mechanism, what I don't like about this prop is that sales tax revenue could go actually solve what I think are bigger problems in the city versus like a transportation grant can go to transportation.
And maybe that's me putting it bluntly, but I don't believe that we have a transportation problem.
And I don't think we do either. We have some congestion. What you're trying to do is look at expansion. But I think when the growth management comes back, I don't even think they change it. And so I think you're going to have this constriction because of this philosophy of how do we keep creating more density? And they forget that you can go right outside that line and build on a house. And it's just fundamental issue with how we deal with these problems. But yeah, I think because you take Monroe, for example, took that down from 3 lanes. And I think that works. That is a walkable pedestrian neighborhood. Division's not a walkable pedestrian neighborhood. Like that will always be a thoroughfare. It was designed to be a thoroughfare. It should be a thoroughfare. And just because you're going to have a couple bikes going on there, where are you going to go to? It's going to be like a path to nowhere.
So there's been a lot of study by, I think it's Transit Oriented Development Department from the city of Spokane.
No, I was on
you were?
I was in those meetings and they're trying to explain it. I'm like, so a Gonzaga student can drive down or bike downtown? Like,
they were trying to
in the area. There's not enough housing to justify it. And I said, when they're doing transit oriented development, it's because the transit is actually effective to get you where you need to go to be there.
You want, right?
Yeah. And I think that's and the other hard part is they're not taking into account how many people work remotely now. Mm-hmm. The need to hop on a bus and go somewhere, food delivery services, things that already take away that need that you used to have, where if you needed food, you got on a bus, walked, went to a grocery store.
And I think probably the big point to make on this is we're not necessarily arguing about that there should be some sort of transit system, but I don't think that the model that they're looking at makes sense. And continuing to fund it like this, it's not a good match to our city. So that's one of the things I think voting no on this forces the transit authority to step back and, really rethink the approach. How do we really serve our community? Because they're not drawing ridership. Certainly I've lived in big cities and I've had cities that have big, expansive transit, and it's nice, but it's appropriate for that environment. It doesn't really seem to be working here. I don't think it's sold it.
I think even in bigger cities, they have to a lot of times incentivize the use of it, right?
Well, they have to de-incentivize the use of the other option.
Exactly.
And that's what's happened. That's what happened in Seattle. Like, I had to park and it was $112 to run in to the place for 2 hours. I'm like, I would be thinking about some sort of public transportation at that point, but like Spokane's not going to be there for a very long time. That'd be like Boise trying to do it. And I'm like, there's just too much land. There's too many options.
The other thing, and this kind of touches on a couple of topics. I think as a guiding principle, we ought to allow people to make decisions on their own, because you are in the best position to decide things for your life, your family, so whether it's education, whether it's transportation, whether it's how you live. And I think the government is not necessarily very well suited, because the government has a lot of one size fits all type of solutions that they're going to apply to everyone. And that is the whole idea behind a market system, where whether it's buying seafood, like if you really love seafood, or maybe you're allergic to beef, for example, I don't know, that's a thing, but
it is if you get bit by a tick.
Oh yeah, I have heard of that.
That's a big deal. Then it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
All right, so those folks, they need to have their
Those ones
seafood.
definitely- Yeah.
Well, and I was using that as an obscure example,
good.
which I think I've used before, which is just kind of like we live in this age of convenience and kind of like, I don't know, the thought of like, just because you can, you should sort of mentality where we're like, well, you know, my neighbor has an iPad for their kid. I should get an iPad for my kid. Like I see this all over the place where I'm kind of like, I feel like no one's thinking things through sometimes. You're just kind of saying this person's doing it or the city next door is doing it or my neighbor's doing it. And so now I'll do it. And then I have this, you know, again, the same sort of thought when I look at people's, I'm in real estate, right? So we go around, but like when you look at people's garages, I don't know how many times I go in people's garages. It's the same Costco shit. I'm sorry, but it's like everybody has a
The black
pressure
boxes
cooker.
with the yellow tops.
Everybody has an, you know, and it's like we all got sold on the fact that we need a new, you know, pressure cooker or a convection oven. I'm like, so it does the same thing your other oven does, except for it sits on top of your counter and does it a minute and a half faster.
Yeah.
But a million people are buying that thing for $65, you know?
Well,
and there's the blender and there's the Ninja and you know, I'm like,
The thing I like about it though is that, hey, maybe you could argue that that wasn't a very good decision or a necessary decision.
it teaches you something.
To have you be able to make that decision as opposed to have the government
Somebody
say,
else make it.
no, you don't get to make that choice.
Right.
Well,
That's where
exactly.
I think that's the guiding principle that I tend to fall back on those types of conversations.
Well, and I like your approach to it because I think the issue is they've made it about whether we should have transit or not have transit. And I don't think enough people are saying, no, they have a budget.
Yeah.
Like stick to a budget.
They
Like,
have $274.2 million.
but a lot of that budget they have to plan for if the funding doesn't come through, right? So they have to hedge out a little bit with that 270, and all of a sudden they're operating.
Well,
but
they were
if you
hedging.
took my
They were
business-
hedging out in 2016 with $40 million.
Yeah, but I'd have to imagine their operating budget's got to be 200 plus million.
I don't know off the top of my what their
Well, I
actual.
should check it,
It is in that
My
presentation.
guess is that's 1 year of operating if they
good.
lost all funding.
Yeah, and I mean not that they're going to.
No.
There are all sorts of sources of funds, and the sales tax is not going to go away. And the whole division thing, in fact, you know, they talk about perhaps using some of it towards that. Actually, this was a really fairly interesting. We had a STA rep come out and do a presentation in front of the Mead School Board. I'm not sure why they chose to.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
It was outside the-
and maybe they didn't hear that we tend to be actually a little bit more conservative. So we weren't necessarily giving them the softball questions. And one of the questions that Breanne Gray, who's the board president, asked was, is this sustainable if you don't have the sales tax? And the STA rep did say, well, based on the reserves and the fact that the tax is going on for a couple of years, you've got 2.5 years before it even ends, that no, you wouldn't have to have immediate changes. And I would argue that any entity that has got 2.5 years to plan for that ought to be able to figure out, how do I cut costs or how do I bring in some more revenue so that I can continue providing the same level of service? I don't think that's an unreasonable ask.
No, the hard part is the expense. I mean, we know from owning properties, but the expenses are going up far faster than the revenue.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the issues when you look at that system of how they're doing it. My fear with the division project is it's a distraction project. It's a shiny object that you can put out in front of everybody instead of showing them, look, we are losing. If I had my business bring in 9% of revenue to cover and I'm getting a 90% grant, like that is a flaw.
Well, that's where my mind immediately goes anyway, is like to play the hardball questions. Why are we having to fund this anyway? Right. Like, why isn't it self-funding or dang near close to
and that's the
self-funding?
sales tax, and that's the sales tax, right? It's supposed to be, but the issue is like we're in the state of Washington. So then every driver's salary is going to go up because of the hours. Every vehicle needs maintenance.
Fuel's going up another 50 cents here. And like
somebody's telling me there was a 2-cent sales tax got added just like within this last week. I was not aware of that.
Yeah. But I think that's where kind of your approach to looking at it, it's almost, why do we need the 56 people? Are there automations? Are there things that we can put into this? Because again, I did this with the homeless one. It just makes me so frustrated. But like in California, they're spending an average of $867,000 a year per person.
Yeah.
But on the count, right? And I'm like, man, we could hit a point where we could pay for Uber for every rider of STA and Instacart and be under budget.
It all comes down to that model.
Like pay for them to travel wherever they want to go in the city based on that ridership.
And I tell you what, it's a good and a service. And a good and a service, if there isn't a cost associated with it. So I studied econ when I was at the academy, and you talk about the tragedy of the commons where, okay, it's a common resource and it seems like you can take as much as you want and there's nothing that's going to be there forever. Well, that's little bit of what happens when you have a service like this, where we aren't really charging anything for it, and there's no value for it, and it gets abused, and they don't have any incentive to become more efficient. Mm-hmm. I think that's why we need to have these market-based incentives to drive them to continue to always look to better serve the community.
Yeah,
it seems like, and STA aside, but it seems like you see this very similar scenario play out in like various facets of the government, or in government supported, like you said, services. It just seems to be like a pattern. And I think that's what I get. I think in my, my more middle age, older Keith ages, where you just start to pick up on those patterns, right? Whether you call it the fiscal irresponsibility, or whether you call it like, there seems to be a theme where things that start to get paid for, that are used by people that are backed by the government, end up being this sort of like tax. We have to do it because we've always done it. We need to keep doing it, but it's getting more expensive, but they're being utilized less or not being used efficiently. Because like you said, the nail on the head there is like, there's no incentive for them to be efficient. Right. STA is shooting themselves in the foot tomorrow if they come and start being very
if they
profitable.
cut to 23 employees, they're not going to get as much funding, right?
Yeah. So and again, this is what you see this in the military. You see this in local government. It's the like, hey, we're coming into port, like send the ammo, it's like, we're not going to get the same budget next year if we don't spend the money this year. And it's this mentality that I don't know how you stop that, right? Like, I don't know how I think we have to just start bringing that back slowly. But I think that's something where you just, as you pay maybe more and more taxes, or you see your tax dollars going less and less towards things that you agree with, or they're not going as far, you kind of say, well, where's the end in sight?
Yeah.
Where does common sense kick back into play? Like, how do we backstep a little bit or start holding things accountable to what they are, And I think that's the pattern I see, and that where I get hip to things or wanted to talk to, gentlemen like you, Alan, it's just like, what are you seeing or feeling? Or when you start looking at this stuff, what do you think the answer is to kind of bring that back a little bit?
First, I'm going to touch on something you said as far as the tax, and it's endless. And that sentiment is extremely strong. And so when I've been talking to people, this message has been resonating. For example, when I came out and announced that I was opposing the STA sales tax, the views of that was 1,000% above the sorts of things that I would post, because everybody read it and like, yeah, that's exactly the concern that I have, that the taxes, they're always asking for more and they never end. And this is a good example of it. And so there is that sentiment across the board. And that's why I think it's important to get that information out there. Like, if you are in support of public transit, that's fine. But at least I want you to look at this, because the issue is not necessarily about you liking it or not. It's about that whose money is it? And is this how we should be spending it? You brought that up briefly, and I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole too much, but it's definitely an issue of how should we be spending the money? But going back to your question, like, all right, how do we address these problems where there's an incentive? And again, I think it comes back to market-based type of solutions. So I talked about how with the Mead School Board, people weren't necessarily happy with what was going on. And so every couple of years we had a chance to bring on a new board member, so that we finally had a large enough group that we could start affecting change. Well, that was a really long process. You think about a market type of response, where if STA is required to at least get closer to funding themselves, and they're not doing it, then they're going to look at making adjustments, as opposed to waiting until the taxpayers go, hey, that's enough. I'm going to wrap you on the knuckles. We're not going to give you this tax money, and go sit in the corner. So I think having as many things as we can, and not trying to make government do what it's not intended to do. The core function of government should be protecting and defending the nation, setting up a system of law where we can live and work together and commerce can flourish. Yes, we can justify having public transit, but that is not a core function. If we start going down this road and we take away these response mechanisms, then we end up with these organizations that are not responsive and are not being efficient with our money.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's the logical part of it that always has like missed or clicked, is the argument that we've always done it this way, or that the government is currently fulfilling a role, to me is only as good as the fact that by it filling that role, you've also thwarted or stopped anybody else from filling the role. So like that's the sensible part of it for me is like, well, you know, if is public transportation like the STA, is it possible for like a private sector company to provide it and make money doing it? Well, you'll never know because
you can't compete with the STA.
Because you can't compete with the STA because it's subsidized by tax dollars. So there's nobody out there even trying to create competition or even trying to create a solution in the private sector or that isn't funded by the government. But then the story that's told though is that it's not possible.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not possible. You can't do it, or we have to do it this way, or if we don't do it, who else will do it? And it's like, well, all of those answers will never be found out because this thing is such a big machine. And I think you kind of see that over and over and over again. And so for me, it comes back to that kind of common sense analysis of like, I don't know, like do I want to see public transportation cut? No, absolutely not. But if we're running it this inefficiently and it's just going to get more and more inefficient, at what point in time do you say enough is enough? And I think that's kind of where you're starting to see, or at least I've started to see a lot of people or conversations that you're having with people of, it seems like more and more people are getting to that point with a lot of things, you know, more so than I've heard in a long time. People are going, okay, when does it stop? Yeah. When does this stop? When does that stop?
Well, it stops when it affects you, right? So that's why I always think of the pothole debacle we always have, right? That we have potholes all over. Well, why do people care about it? Probably because they hit a pothole.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's three of us that don't write STA saying why you should cut this way back. And then there's a population. I mean, 9% is probably still a couple 100,000 riders a year. I mean, that will probably rely on it for their livelihood. And I think
I guarantee not. No way.
Yeah. According to the study,
think about it. There's only 200 and some thousand people in the city limits. I mean, there's only
riders. I guess I wouldn't say riders. I wouldn't say individual riders. Right. I think that's
somebody who took a ride. Yeah.
That's, I think, how many
same dude making 100 rides.
Yeah.
There's
it's an occasional thing for most people. And Gavin Cooley, when he went and did this deep dive, and again, he's making a lot of assumptions, but I think they're valid assumptions. He looked at it as maybe you could argue there's about 2% of the population that it's a critical resource for them. Yeah. And I'm not saying we ignore that 2%, but just realize do we move heaven and earth to do that, or is there a better way?
Yeah. And it probably is. I mean, because again, you look at the homeless population, it's even smaller and it's a bigger part of our general fund.
Yeah.
As a city, right? And it's really difficult one where
you know what? This is so far off topic, but I at least wanted to bring that up because this is one of the things I think that we need to really flip the script on when it comes to addressing homelessness and drug addiction, because really the two go hand in hand. Yeah. And right now, the way I see it that we fund this is we've got an agency that says, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to help these people and we're going to solve their problem. And so we fund them. And then when they don't achieve the results, there isn't any consequence. What we really ought to do is say, okay, listen, show me that you're helping. There's groups like Ascenda. There's groups like Union Gospel Mission where they're going out there. They're not receiving public dollars. They are, in fact, helping people. What if we said, instead, you show me that you have helped somebody. We've gotten clean for 3 months, 6 months, a year. I will pay you based on what you did.
Yeah. Right. It's weird we don't have performance contracts, to your point.
Yeah.
Like there's no ramifications. If my builder misses a deadline, there's liquidated damages.
Yeah.
And it's just weird in that industry. We don't have any teeth to whatever it is, but we just keep spending the money. And I think to that point, I think people woke up and they don't want to spend the money. The downside is we've been spending the money for so long that like unwinding that is really difficult. And I think the hard part is these are present because you can see an STA bus all the time. You can see homeless people, but I'm like, I think our infrastructure needs all 270 million and then some.
Yeah. Or
that's going to fail. And you won't even think about it until all of a sudden you can't flush a toilet.
Mm-hmm.
Or all of a sudden your property taxes triple or some effect like that. And I think having these conversations and having them in a very business approach is needed. It's just, I think where you lose people is when it's only business instead of, like my Whitney would argue, hey, we need to save those 15 people over here. And in my head, I'm like, well, we can't actually fund that. How do we do that? And I think there's this juxtaposition between those two, which makes it political. When really this isn't a business that works. Is this thing we want to subsidize forever? That's the reality of it.
Yeah, it comes back to, let's define what the problem is. If we can agree on what the problem is, we got a better chance of coming up with some sort of a approach that perhaps is going to work, everybody's behind, and that is going to reach a common goal.
Yeah, and you sound common sense, but then you play these out, right? So then you have a moratorium placed on drive-through restaurants.
Yeah.
Well, how is that funded? sales tax. So like the thing that actually funds the things we want to fund, we're limiting the things that create the dollars that do it.
Right.
And I'm like, this is so you want a road diet division, reduce the number of traffic on a street that if you could put it, it's probably billions that generates.
Yeah.
And yet we're going to restrict the thing that actually is fun. It's like biting the hand that feeds you. And it's so hard for me to sit and watch all the time. Where it's like, it's a sales tax. So the more sales we have, the more money we'll have to go address these things.
If I'm a business owner on division, I would just be fuming at the concept that they're looking to reduce the traffic that goes past my business. That's significant.
Because you'll never be pedestrian, right? Again, Monroe, I think that was an honest fight because now they literally have pedestrian garland, pedestrian traffic. It's conducive
and I think
to
what
it.
you're alluding to there, just for the listeners that are, if you're not familiar or don't come downtown as much or whatever, is it's like, it'd be like talking about the Vegas Strip as being pedestrian.
Yeah.
You come out of the Mirage and you're like, oh, walk to Bellagio. And about a third of the way there, you're like, this was a mistake.
Exactly. Nobody's walking division. I'll tell you that.
Too far. And I think, division is that, whereas Monroe is much more densely packed. So yes, you can go to lunch and you can eat a cheeseburger and you can walk down the street. And
shopping, you can do all
exactly.
The things.
And you wouldn't die trying to get to the next place.
Well, because they're trying to use that as a success story to justify this. And I'm like, those are not the same.
Nope.
Those are projects. And Sprague, they're trying to use Sprague too. And I'm like, not the same project. Like closely dense retail food. Division is fast food drive-through restaurants.
Yeah. And the commerce there, like you got the mall, you got whatever, but it's like nobody's walking from the Burlington Coat Factory to Taco Bell or whatever, right? Like it's like
just the parking lot of Burlington's far enough.
You park in the back of the lot. You gotta check.
So this is the hardest one. So I worked as an intern in Olympia for a senator out of Moses Lake, amazing lady. And I remember talking with her about it. And everybody has great fiscal response. These are all great terms, by the way. And I think after talking to you, I believe you could achieve those. How are you going to achieve them? Because it's super difficult once you get there to actually make an impact. And that's not just a jaded version of Jordan. I think that's actually a real thing. But what's your approach to getting something done in that kind of environment?
Yeah, and that's a great point. So first and foremost, you got to be willing to talk to other people. And I'll use the millionaire's tax when that was passed. So there are others in the Democratic Party who didn't support it. There were 8, I think, on the House of Representatives who voted against it. So there are others out that you can go and talk with. There are some people who you're probably just not going to find any common ground with. That is what it is. So trying to find common ground with those who are willing to consider getting in a room and coming up with practical solutions that maybe at least everybody's a little bit happy. One of the other things, though, is the legislature focuses on legislation, but that's only one of its duties. Another key duty is oversight. And whether you are in the minority, if you are on a committee, for example, and every representative is going to be assigned to a committee. So I think most of them sit on 2 to 3. So if you are a government agency within that, it's important if your committee member is coming in and asking you questions about your budget, about your operations, things like that. So oversight, I think we need to step back from legislation. I think we need to go a little bit more towards oversight and that function of the legislature. That's one way to move the conversation a little bit towards the concept of accountability and data-driven results. When we do have legislation, there's going to be needs for it. Honestly, one of the things I would like to try and do is where we put forward amendments on any bill that comes forward should have a goal that it's trying to achieve, and it should have metrics in terms of how it's going to be measured against that. And I would say that any new legislation ought to, at the 5-year point, be required to go through reauthorization based on analysis of how did you do against those metrics for the goal that we want. And if we can't say that this looks like it's working, then maybe we either need to get rid of it or we need to change the approach, because it's like what you say, where a law is passed and it's like the legislature never looks at it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's happening a lot, but I also think that's something that can be helpful or can be helped by people who just pay attention.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what I hear you saying is like, yeah, there's the legislative side, like trying to change things or make things happening is one aspect of it, but also holding people's feet to the flame, just paying attention, keeping your thumb on the things that they're already doing to just at least shine a spotlight on it or bring attention to like when things are not being fiscally responsible, when things are not like going as planned. And I think that's just one of those common sense things every business has to have if you want to be a successful business. So we tend to talk a lot about business. So you're kind of like, well, duh. Why wouldn't you do that? But when it comes to the government or legislation, a lot of times you find out they don't do that. And you're like, what do you mean they don't do that? No, they don't do that. And you're like, they don't do that. They're like, no, they don't do that. And I was like, they should do that. Yes, they should. Yeah. So, just to hear you say that is a breath of fresh air, because it really can be that simple to some extent.
Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to go and somebody's going to listen to that and the world's going to change. The goal, okay, we didn't get to where we are overnight, and we're not going to fix the problems we have immediately. So looking for small wins. I think that STA and rejecting this is a small win where we send a strong message to that agency that, okay, maybe we aren't really paying attention to what our community needs and what our community wants, and that we need to relook at that, engage with our community, and show them that the money that that we are entrusting with them is being spent well and spent appropriately.
Well, that's just more than fair. I mean, it's something I know, Carl.
I'm a very reasonable person. Come on.
Yeah. I've talked to Carl a few times. I mean, they're smart. They're running the analysis. They're doing those things.
Oh, Carl. Okay.
Yeah, he's awesome. And I think what they do down there is great. It's hard to see those operational things, and then us just turn a blind eye to these other parts.
And I tell you what, I got to be honest. I've got to say good things about the STA too, because, and this is a little bit grading on the curve, to be honest, but as far as transit authorities, they are a relatively well-run entity. Yeah. It's just that they're grading on the curve.
Yeah. They're doing the analysis, right? They're diving into this stuff.
And I'm sorry to cut you off there. I want you to finish that thought, but I'm saying, as far as a layman user, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
It shows up when it's supposed to show up. I've been on a few of them.
You have? I've actually never ridden one. I should ride one.
When I went to college, when I went to college at GU, I lived up north. I used to hit it every other day, the days that I worked, I hit it. The days that I didn't. But I don't have any complaints with it. Yeah. I think it is fine. For me, I'm like, but I also don't know that we need to be spending more money on it.
What's funny about politics, though, is the other side of the party would look at the same graph that shows a steady climb from 40 million to 274 and argue that is fiscally responsible. Yeah. They're putting away reserves. We're saving up for rainy days. We're hedging our bets here, right? And it's the weirdest thing.
But you're doing it with taxpayers' money. Yeah. That's where hold on. I don't know what this graph looked like before, but what I'm saying is you've been able to do that when you've had available additional taxpayers' money. And so to me, that's like, well, that's like me pitching to you, like if I'm your kid and you're giving me $100 allowance a month, and then later I'm like, Dad, I'm such a good saver, and you're like, of my money I'm giving you, right? I don't know that you're being fiscally responsible.
Yeah, but we voted those ones in, so they're still doing that. But I'm saying that's how you should, as I've learned from my business, I ran pretty lean on all of them trying to invest in the next thing. And you look at it and you're like, your hope would be, because expenses have gone up in those 10-year stretch. So you're hopefully saving for those. I think the argument is is that the most efficient way to do it?
Well, let me show you how fiscally responsible I can be if you give me your money.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah.
I'll show you.
You didn't have to make money. Yes, so fiscally responsible, I think, from an accounting perspective is what I'm talking about, not from a operational revenue generation perspective.
Correct.
Sorry, I'm separating those two.
Yes, no.
But as a CFO looking at that, they did their job.
Yeah.
They are if this tax doesn't come, we have enough to weather for a minute.
Would that have occurred if they had not been receiving that money?
No. Well, we wouldn't have an STA. And then I think, to your point, is that we are a capitalist economy. We don't always give capitalists a chance to fix the solution.
That's true.
And I think that's one where it does. So the big one we've been looking into, and this kind of ties in, so I'm not segueing too far off, but as we're doing future planning for some of the new projects we're doing. And the biggest thing that we're kicking back on, or at least all our AI models are kicking back on, is the amount of parking we're allocating.
When you say we, are you talking about
my team?
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry, my team, as we're modeling this large 500 unit community.
All right.
And so we're looking at how many parking stalls per unit. Well, historically, you wanted at least 2. Yeah. 1 per bedroom is kind of what our model was. And then now we're like, well, I don't know if we're going to need that in 10 years. I think you're going to have an automation accelerate so fast.
Autonomous driving.
And so there's this
a lot
world,
of scooters.
But all of a sudden,
scooters.
how irrelevant when all of a sudden you can have a Tesla fleet that's doing some of that work too. Yeah. You don't have to pay the driver. You're doing these. And I think that's where they're going to have to grapple with some of that. The biggest one I can test was they put in that central city line. And I'm like, I took up 7 parking spots in front of Brick West on both sides. And I watch that bus pretty regularly. And I'm like, there's 3 people that get on and off it. And it's just one of those pieces where it was touted as this thing, but it didn't hit the billing. And instead of pivoting or figuring out what it is, it's like we ride that horse into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then only when it absolutely can't go any further, it's like, oh, we should probably look at something else. And my fear is with how fast technology and specifically transportation technology is changing, that we're not ready for that. And we'll have this fleet of all these massive buses using natural gas that will now be banned in city, like to use in houses. And it's that fear is that we're going to keep putting more and more, put another 270 million behind a horse that I don't know if that's what it looks like in the next 10 years.
Yeah, there's opportunity cost to this. And that's one of the key things. Like what you talked about, there's other things we can do with this money. I don't like looking at it and assuming it's the government's money and that it's just a matter of how we spend it by the government. It's not. It's the individual's money. But there is a need for government, there is going to be a need for some government services. And that we want to make sure that we're doing that right and doing that efficiently and effectively. We should also look to create mechanisms that don't require the ballot box and a 2 or 4 year cycle in order to achieve any real change.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be funny. I'll do the math after this, but I'm pretty sure you could buy every one of those riders on there a Tesla.
Yeah.
And it'd still be cheaper.
I mean, I don't disagree, man. Like I said, you start looking at the usership and you start looking at the population base and again, convenience versus need. If you were to talk just specific need, the people who need to get to the doctor who otherwise couldn't, the people who need, like, you could probably service those people cheaper with Uber drivers.
Yeah. Yeah. And you brought up one I was going to see you touch on. I think this is a big topic, especially locally. It's a big topic, but the millionaire tax, what's your 90-second take on that and the impact and what people didn't know about it?
I don't know that I'm not sure I need 90 seconds. Ultimately, and the people who put it forward knew it's unconstitutional, that there's extensive precedent. There's numerous votes across the last 100 years, 80 years, where the state has said, no, we don't want an income tax. They put it forward anyway. And I'm not entirely sure what their strategy was. And maybe they don't either, other than they want another new revenue stream. Yeah. But what it is doing is it is sending a clear signal that, hey, if you've got money and you've been building a business or you've been investing in Washington, we don't really want you. And we have seen some of those people leave. Yeah. Ultimately, this again comes back. I think the argument that needs to be made is whose money is it? And there's a lot of people in politics who don't understand that the money that wealthy people have didn't just drop into their pocket. They spent a lot of years, and I'm not making a ton. I pay myself $500 a month in my business, and I work a lot of hours. So I probably net out on maybe about a penny an hour. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's hard to understand if you aren't in that position, and we want people to have that incentive because that's a good thing. Those incentives help to create the new jobs, the Googles, the Amazons, the Boeing, the next big thing. Who knows what that's going to be? Yeah. But by pushing some of these creative people out, I think that we're doing long-term harm to our state and to our economy.
For sure. And I mean, you said it sends the message loud and clear that, we don't want you here. The message I hear loud and clear is, oh no, we want you here. We're just going to take it. Yeah. That's kind of the messaging I got.
That's not the message they're sending.
We want you here. We want you here so we can just take your money without, cause, really. I mean, that to me is kind of the, again, ruffling the feathers on the back of like the, middle-aged Keith who's going, what's going on here is just kind of like, when does it stop? When does this, ship turn around? Why is this happening? But it is literally spending without regard to where they're going to get the money and then finding out where they're going to get the money next. Yeah. So they're just literally saying, we need this new thing. We want this new shiny object. We think everybody should get a puppy for Christmas. And then voting on it, everyone's like, yeah, everybody should get a puppy for Christmas. That sounds like a good idea. Who doesn't want a puppy? I like a puppy. My kid needs a puppy. And then when somebody goes, how are we going to pay for that? They're like, we'll find out a way.
Or how are we going to take care of the puppy?
Well, no, how are you going to pay for it? And they're like, we'll figure it out. And then inevitably that figuring it out is a new tax or a new way to get more money from the people who can pay it, and they'll squeeze wherever they can squeeze. And this time they squeeze with the millionaires because they're like, what they got? Hey, who should we squeeze? I don't know, the people that have a lot of money. So let's squeeze them. But it's that to me, and I'm being a little blunt about this, but that is the common theme that you see occurring specifically in Washington state politics is decisions to do or not do things without regard for the financial repercussions or collecting of those finances. And then this secondary push to just find the money. It's like, we're going to make a decision and we're going to pass something, and then we're just going to figure out a way to guide them. And to me, it's like, that only bodes so well for so long. And I think it's just starting to not bode well, obviously for me, but also in general, like it will break at some point. It's breaking. And I think that's where, in my mind, so many of these things are cross-connected, and people are just probably not looking at the big enough picture, right? That 30,000 foot view. You take off in an airplane, you go to somewhere, everyone looks like an ant. It's like you finally get up high enough to kind of see, oh my gosh, this is where the river feeds in. And I think that when you look at drug addiction, you look at homelessness, you look at, people don't cause and correlate those things very well, right? And I think that a financial impact that you might be making to help the STA, as an example, or whatever, they don't realize that can create homelessness, that can create someone who can no longer pay for this other thing in their life that they need. This trickle down effect of like, when you start seeing, to me, it's very obvious that it's all connected. Like, it's very obvious that when you have high taxation and fiscal irresponsibility, you also have a high amount of anxiety, depression, drug addiction, and homelessness. And yet people are saying, again, the snake that's eating its tail, well, we just need more tax money so we can help these homeless people. It's like, you're creating them. Like, this is the reason they're homeless and drug addicted. So, but again, that's just my take on it. And I think at some point in time, it's a little bit frustrating, but it's also like, something's got to be done about it. And I appreciate you, Alan, and I appreciate the people like you who are willing to do something about it, who are willing to say, whether it's enough is enough, or just, I got a creative idea, or I'd like to be more involved, And I think that's where maybe I'm bringing this full circle. This is a key therapy session. I'm just happy. Session.
I can appreciate it.
But like,
I'll send you a bill.
Exactly. that desire to get involved, I think, comes from moments like these or things like these. And I resonate with somebody like yourself who choose to get involved. And I just want to say thanks for coming on the show and
I appreciate
sharing that with us, and best of luck. And absolutely.
And how can people find out more about you?
So my website is Nolan 4WA. It's NOLAN, the number 4, WA.com. And I'm also on Facebook as well, Nolan for Washington. And that's where I tend to put more information. Okay. And speaking of that, so a lot of the deep dive on the information that we've been talking about relative to STA Prop 1 is posted on my website. It's under hot topics. And ultimately, the goal is I'm really about source data. I don't want to just go off of what somebody told me. And I want to be transparent and put that information out there. So that was one of my big things is I try to give specific information as to why I oppose STA Prop 1. And then when people say, hey, what's your source? I'm like, that's a great question. Let me get that for you. Yeah. And so that's all on there. And also on there, I have no problem taking the tough questions. I've got my phone number on the website as well as my email, and I'm the one who's answering it. So if you got questions for me, please reach out.
No, absolutely. And we'll put all of that stuff in the show notes. Brennan's really good about that. So
thanks, Brent. Can you read that?
No, it's copies and pastes.
Yeah. But Alan, just one more thing before I let you go. But last week when we talked on the phone, you said you were out campaigning and you said you were going around talking to folks, and you gave me a call in between. But like, that's literally, you're taking your weekends, you're going out, you're knocking doors, you're just having basic conversation with people in the district, and just, how's that going?
It's going really well. And honestly, I'm an introvert. So it kind of surprised me. I found out I do enjoy going and talking to people at the doors, and the reception has been pretty good. And especially on this STA thing, I mentioned, hey, here's what's going on. And the people are head nodding. Yeah. And people have concerns. I'm not the only one who knows somebody who is actively thinking about moving out of the state. Yeah. And that's because, it takes a lot for somebody to even look at a decision like that. The U-Haul index is not in Washington State's favor. So there are issues out there. People are aware of it, and they're willing to look for solutions. I think one of the things that has resonated is I try not to go in there, and I'm not trying to be a MAGA person. I'm not trying to be a progressive. I'm not trying to take a hard line. I'd like to try and solve Washington problems. I did have a lady earlier in the day who was asking me whether I like Trump, and like, well, I'll talk with you about Trump if you want. But he's a really divisive figure. And honestly, I'm more focused on let's try and solve the problems that are here. Right. Ultimately, that answer wasn't good enough, and it is what it is. But if we don't have these conversations, we aren't certainly going to solve things, and we are going to end up just being a more fractured society. But yes, I do spend a lot of time out, and you may find me on your door if you're not asleep or anything. I'm not a homeless person. Knocking on your door, and love to have the chance to speak with you if you're in the 6th Legislative District.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Well, thank you much. Again, all of that will be in the show notes, and thanks for your time today, Alan.
Hey, appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate it.
Have a great 4th.
Likewise. Go America. America. All right, you guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode. While you're out there, would you please do us a favor and give us a like, subscribe, or a follow, whether you listen on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. Also, if you don't mind while you're there, give us a 5-star review. Maybe write a review. If you have a favorite episode, feel free to give it a like. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it.